Most people know Michigan for its auto industry, but stretching across the state are areas that completely deviated from standard urban planning. Some were built in isolated locations and operated under rules entirely contrary to the rest of America. We are looking at the history of places that banned motor vehicles completely in the late 19th century, or towns forced to relocate entire houses because the ground collapsed from iron mining. These are not just failed towns. They are strange models of development. All of this is covered in this video, 10 Michigan Towns So Weird. Hit the subscribe button to support factual, data-driven history. Make sure to stick around for number 1, where you will see exactly how nature erased an entire town after humans cut down their final layer of windbreak trees. Number 10, Marshall, Michigan. In Marshall, Michigan, there is a mansion that was built for a governor, but the strange part is this: the capital city it was waiting for never came. This house is not just an ordinary historic building. It was built in 1839, back when Marshall still believed it had a real chance of becoming the capital of Michigan. The people here did not just talk about that possibility, they prepared for it. They built a governor's mansion in advance, as if becoming the center of political power for the state was only a matter of time. That says a lot about what Marshall once was. During the years when Michigan was still shaping its political map, Marshall was considered an important contender. The town was confident enough to imagine that the governor might one day live here, that major state decisions could be made here, and that Michigan's future might pass through these streets. And that is what makes the mansion feel so ironic today. From the outside, it looks like a dignified white Greek revival home standing quietly in town. But when you think about the role it was meant to serve, it feels less like a house and more like evidence. Evidence of a political gamble Marshall truly believed it would win. If Marshall had become the capital, the town could have taken a completely different path. Government buildings would likely have followed. Lawyers, hotels, restaurants, newspapers, public offices, and constant waves of people traveling for state business might have transformed this small town into the political heart of Michigan. But after several rounds of political decisions, the final choice did not go to Marshall. It went to Lansing. Marshall did not lose everything. The town survived. It remains beautiful, historic, and peaceful, but it lost another version of itself. The version its people once believed was inevitable. Today, the governor's mansion still stands as a historic site, but it feels like more than a museum. It feels like the leftover trace of a future that never happened. One timeline made Lansing the capital. Another timeline, the one that never became real, still lingers inside that house. Marshall is not strange because it failed. It is strange because it prepared for victory so completely that, nearly 2 centuries later, the proof of that belief is still standing in the middle of town. Marshall was never erased from the map. History simply pushed it into a supporting role. Yet the mansion remains there, almost as if the town never fully gave up on the future it once believed would belong to it. Number 9, Onaway, Michigan. In Onaway, Michigan, people can come across giant metal presidential heads, massive steel structures sitting outdoors, and an oversized steering wheel that looks like something built for a giant. At first glance, the town feels like a strange roadside attraction, but Onaway did not choose the steering wheel by accident. Behind that giant wheel is part of the town's industrial history. Onaway was once home to the American Wood Rim Company, a factory that originally specialized in wooden bicycle rims. When America's auto industry began exploding in the early 20th century, the company shifted into producing wooden steering wheels for automobiles. From a small town in northern Michigan, Onaway became part of a rapidly growing automotive industry. A small town does not need to assemble entire cars to become part of automotive history. Sometimes it only needs to control one part that every driver touches. The steering wheel was not the biggest piece of the vehicle, but it was the one drivers placed their hands on every single day. It was where the feeling of control began. So, when Onaway used the slogan, "Onaway steers the world," it was more than just a clever play on words. It was the town placing itself inside America's automobile era. American Wood Rim supplied steering wheels to multiple car companies, truck manufacturers, and even some tractor makers. For Onaway, it was a period when the town felt much larger than it does today. Before the fire, Onaway once had around 4,000 residents. Its two major industries could employ well over 1,000 workers. The town had hotels, saloons, churches, doctors, bakeries, newspapers, fairgrounds, a racetrack, and even an opera house. People here were not simply making steering wheels. They were living inside an entire industrial ecosystem. Then the fire came. On the morning of January 14th, 1926, a massive fire destroyed a critical part of the factory. For Onaway, it was not just an accident. It was the moment the town's old lifeline snapped. Its primary economic engine went up in flames, and the most prosperous version of Onaway began slipping into the past. But the town did not let that history remain buried under old concrete foundations. Years later, Tom Moran, founder of Moran Iron Works, transformed leftover steel and scrap metal into giant sculptures at Awakan Park. The enormous heads, raw steel plates, and visible welding marks make the place feel less like a polished art park and more like an industrial workshop brought into the open air. What makes it even more meaningful is that Awakan Park sits on land connected to the old American Wood Rim Company site. People walking through the park are not just looking at scrap metal turned into art. They are standing on the same ground where steering wheels for America were once produced. Onaway is not strange because it has a few steel sculptures by the roadside. It is strange because those steel structures feel like pieces of the town's industrial memory, welded back together so they can stand one more time. Long ago, Onaway once placed its hands on the steering wheel of America. Today, it uses leftover steel to preserve the memory of that hand. Number 8. Battle Creek, Michigan. On breakfast tables across millions of American homes, a bowl of cereal can seem completely ordinary. Pour the cereal into a bowl, add milk, eat for a few minutes, then head to work or school. But if you trace the story of that breakfast back far enough, the trail leads to one city in Michigan, Battle Creek. What makes it strange is that Battle Creek did not begin the cereal story with colorful boxes, cartoon mascots, or sugary breakfasts for children. Its origins were far more serious. The city was closely tied to the Battle Creek Sanitarium, where Dr. John Harvey Kellogg and W.K. Kellogg experimented with simple, easy-to-digest foods that matched the health philosophies of the time. One famous story says that in 1894, cooked wheat was accidentally left overnight, then rolled into thin flakes and toasted. From what began as a health food experiment, an entirely new type of breakfast started to emerge. At first, cereal was not a symbol of modern convenience. It was part of an effort to change the way Americans ate. But once that product left the sanitarium and entered the marketplace, its meaning changed very quickly. The Kellogg brothers helped lay the foundation for cereal flakes. But Battle Creek was never just the story of one family. C.W. Post, who had once been a patient at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, also recognized the opportunity. He stayed in Battle Creek, opened his own operation, experimented with health foods, and eventually created products like postum and grape nuts. From there, the city was pulled into a full-scale cereal boom. In the early 20th century, Americans began wanting breakfasts that were faster, cleaner, pre-packaged, and easier to prepare. Battle Creek became a place where cereal companies appeared almost everywhere. At one point, more than 100 cereal companies were registered there. Many smaller businesses disappeared before 1910, but Battle Creek kept its special place as Kellogg, Post, and other brands carried cereal onto breakfast tables across America. An invention can create a product, but only a craze can build a city. Battle Creek was not simply selling breakfast. It was selling a new way to start the day, fast, modern, efficient, and seemingly healthy. A cereal box did not just contain grains, it carried the promise that mornings could become simpler. Today, Battle Creek is still remembered as Cereal City, even though the cereal industry has changed dramatically. Consumers now pay closer attention to sugar, protein, and alternative convenience foods, while the market continues shifting. In 2025, Ferrero completed its acquisition of W.K. Kellogg Company, yet Battle Creek remains known as one of the core centers of the North American cereal industry. In many places, cities create products. In Battle Creek, the product came back and created the city. A breakfast bowl that seemed so small ended up generating jobs, reputation, tourism, memories, and local identity. A small city quietly entered America's morning routine, and stayed there for so long that many people almost forgot breakfast itself once began as a very unusual story. Number 7. Charlevoix, Michigan. In Charlevoix, Michigan, there are small houses tucked beneath the trees, their curved roofs drooping low, as if embracing the ground. Their walls are built from massive stones. From a distance, they do not look like houses that were placed into the town. They look as though they grew there first, and people simply added doors, windows, and started living inside them. Many people call them the mushroom houses because they resemble mushrooms or hobbit homes. But stopping at that nickname oversimplifies the story. This is not a theme park. Many of these are real private homes, woven directly into everyday life in Charlevoix. Several commercial buildings, including Weathervane Restaurant, Weathervane Terrace Inn and Suites, and Hotel Earl, are also connected to the same man, Earl Young. Earl Young was not the kind of builder who followed ordinary architectural rules. He was a self-taught designer who spent almost his entire life connected to Charlevoix. Beginning around 1919 and continuing for roughly 50 years, he completed 26 homes and 4 commercial buildings. Most of those structures still exist today. What made him different was the way he viewed land, stone, and the shape of a house itself. He was not interested in straight lines, tall facades, or perfectly square structures. Instead, he used limestone, fieldstone, and giant boulders from northern Michigan, shaping them into homes that were low, heavy, curved, and closely tied to the surrounding landscape. The name mushroom houses makes them sound like fairy tales, but the philosophy behind them was surprisingly practical. Earl Young did not want to force the land to serve the house. He wanted the house to learn how to stand on that land. That is why every home feels different. Some have rolling cedar shake roofs. Others feature wide, low eaves that resemble mushroom caps. Some have thick stone chimneys, tiny windows, oversized rock walls, and horizontal shapes that spread outward rather than upward. Names like Half House, Mushroom House, Owl House, and Boulder Manor make them easier to remember. But the most remarkable thing about them is how inseparable they feel from the terrain around them. In photographs, they often appear soft and whimsical. But creating that softness required enormous physical labor. Huge stones had to be found, hauled, cut, positioned, and assembled by hand. Roofs that seemed to curve naturally were actually the result of extremely careful craftsmanship. Over time, Earl Young's unusual vision was not erased by the town. Charlevoix protected it instead. In 2016, the Earl Young Local Historic District was officially established to preserve 11 of the homes along with their original surrounding landscape. Number 6. Mackinac Island. The first thing that makes Mackinac Island feel different from the rest of America is not something people see. It is something they do not hear: cars. There are no engines rolling down the main streets, no horns cutting through crowds of tourists. Instead, there is the sound of horse hooves, bicycle wheels, rolling suitcases coming off the ferry docks, and a pace of movement that feels noticeably slower than the mainland. But Mackinac Island's not an island forgotten by modern history. Cars actually appeared there very early. In the late 19th century, the first horseless carriages began arriving. For a place that still operated almost entirely with horses and carriages, the sound and behavior of automobiles created serious problems. Horses became frightened, traffic turned chaotic, and accidents became a growing concern. So, on July 6, 1898, village leaders decided to ban the vehicles. Later, automobiles were also prohibited inside Mackinac Island State Park beginning in 1901. By 1960, the ban was written into Michigan state law, with only a few exceptions, mostly for emergency vehicles. What makes the story interesting is that something which now feels nostalgic actually began as a practical decision. Cars were not banned to create a charming historic atmosphere for tourists. They were banned because they made the island less safe and less functional. Once automobiles disappeared from everyday life, the entire rhythm of the island changed. Pedestrians gained more space. Bicycles became the most natural way to move around. Horse-drawn carriages stopped being just tourist entertainment and remained part of the island's real transportation system. On Mackinac, traffic laws did not simply change transportation. They changed the entire feeling of time. The island is not quiet because it is empty. During tourist season, Mackinac Island is full of downtown shops, hotels, fudge stores, carriage tours, bicycles, and ferries arriving constantly with visitors. But even the crowds sound different here. They are not buried beneath engines and traffic noise the way they are in most American towns. Beneath its car-free identity, the island also carries a much deeper history. Mackinac Island has long held cultural importance for Ojibwa and Onaway communities. From 1875 to 1895, it served as America's second national park after Yellowstone National Park, before later becoming Michigan's first state park. Today, Mackinac understands exactly what many modern travelers are searching for: a place that slows people down. The fudge shops, Victorian architecture, Grand Hotel, bicycles circling the island, and the moment visitors step off the ferry, all combine into an experience that has been carefully preserved. Mackinac Island is not completely free of machines. Emergency vehicles, maintenance equipment, and a few special use vehicles still exist behind the scenes. But in everyday life, machinery has been pushed into the background. The rest of the island belongs to footsteps, bicycle wheels, and horse hooves. Number 5. Gay, Michigan. Along the shore of Lake Superior, near the small community of Gay, there is a beach that no longer looks like a normal beach. The sand here is not golden, white, or even the typical gray stone common around the Great Lakes. It is black, coarse, heavy, and from a distance it almost looks as if someone dumped industrial ash across the shoreline. But that black color did not come from volcanoes or some beautiful natural phenomenon. It came from copper. More specifically, it came from what was left behind after people extracted copper from rock. The black shoreline in Chi is made of stamp sand. This is the crushed rock waste left over after copper ore was processed. In the early 20th century, the area was home to stamp mills operated by Mohawk and Wolverine mining companies. The mills crushed ore, separated out the valuable copper, and dumped the remaining waste near the shores of Lake Superior. Gay was never a major American city. The community first developed around logging, then became part of the larger copper mining and processing network across Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula. Around 1915, the town had roughly 800 residents. For a small settlement, that meant a real industrial life. Factories, workers, transportation, smoke, machinery, and money tied to copper. But the copper itself did not stay in Gay. It was sold, shipped away, and absorbed into the wider economy. Eventually, the mills shut down. The thing that remained the longest was the material once treated as worthless waste. According to recorded estimates, more than 22 million metric tons of stamp sands were deposited at the Gay site, and much of it did not remain in place. Waves, wind, and water currents gradually pulled the material along the shoreline. Researchers estimate that over 85% of the original stamp sand pile has eroded away from its original location. That is why this is not simply a black sand beach for tourists to photograph. In Gay, the industrial past is still moving. The harder part of the story lies beneath the water. Stamp sands can smother near-shore habitats and threaten Buffalo Reef, an important spawning ground for lake trout and lake whitefish. The black shoreline is only the most visible part of the problem. The rest is an ecological story that scientists are still monitoring today. Along the shores of Gay, the remains of old industries still create a very unusual atmosphere. Black sand, the cold waters of Lake Superior, fragments of former mills, wide open emptiness, and a coastline that was permanently rewritten by industrial waste. Number 4. Negaunee, Michigan. In most towns, the ground beneath people's feet is something they barely think about. People walk, build houses, pave roads, and put up fences while assuming the earth below them is solid and dependable. But in Negaunee, there were areas where the ground carried a very different story. It had been dug into, blasted apart, tunneled through, reinforced, and eventually abandoned. Negaunee did not happen to grow near a mine by coincidence. The town grew because of mining. Jackson Mine was one of the key starting points of the Lake Superior iron mining industry. It is recognized as the region's first open-pit iron mine, originally centered around a massive ore outcrop, rising roughly 150 feet high. Early miners worked with pry bars, picks, hand drills, and explosives. At that time, iron ore was not seen as a threat. It was a promise. It brought workers, money, homes, and ambition to the area around Teal Lake. Mining did not immediately damage Negaunee. In many ways, it was the reason the town could exist at all. But as extraction continued over the years, the story slowly changed direction. mining expanded deeper along the ore body. Open pits, shafts, drifts, and underground workings created a subsurface landscape that was no longer simple or stable. What Negaunee removed from the earth was not only iron ore, it also removed the certainty that the surface above would always remain safe. The clearest example of that story can be found in Old Town, sometimes called Old Town Negaunee. This was once a real residential neighborhood, not a recreated tourist attraction. But when cave-ins and unstable ground became serious concerns, some residents were forced to leave. In certain cases, people did not simply move their belongings. Entire houses had to be relocated to safer ground. What remains in Old Town today is not a collection of dramatic ghost buildings. The more striking details are the smaller traces left behind. Foundations, stairways, sidewalks, walking paths, and markers showing where people once lived. Those remnants still carry the shape of ordinary life, only without the people who once used them. Today, Negaunee has not turned the entire area into forbidden land. Parts of the former caving grounds have been repurposed into the Iron Ore Heritage Trail, heritage parks, and recreational spaces. Visitors can walk through the area, read historical information, look down toward the old Jackson mine site, and understand how the town once operated. But the boundaries are still there. Areas containing abandoned mine workings or unstable ground still require fences, warning signs, and controlled access paths. In Negaunee, fences do more than divide land. They separate the parts of the past that people can safely explore from the parts that are better left untouched. Number 3. Fayette Historic Townsite, Michigan. At Fayette Historic State Park, you do not walk into a ghost town filled with collapsing buildings, shattered windows, and weeds swallowing the streets. You walk into something much quieter. The stone walls are still standing. The wooden houses still face the harbor, and the iron furnaces remain there as if they only cooled down yesterday, not more than a century ago. What makes Fayette strange is that it does not look frightening. It looks too intact. Fayette Historic State Park sits on Michigan's Garden Peninsula along the shore of Lake Michigan, overlooking Big Bay de Noc between Snail Shell Harbor and Sand Bay. Today the location feels scenic and peaceful, but originally it was chosen for far more practical reasons. The harbor allowed transportation of workers, supplies, and ore. Nearby limestone cliffs provided material for iron production. Surrounding forests supplied wood that could be turned into charcoal for the blast furnaces. In other words, the beauty people see in Fayette today was once industrial logic. From 1867 to 1891, Fayette was a real industrial community. Around 500 people once lived around its furnaces: machine shop, company store, school, post office, hotel, and the ordinary routines of a company town. Places that are now covered in grass, walking paths, and informational signs were once filled with smoke, machinery, horses, children, and workers moving in and out of stores. Fayette was not simply a factory with a few supporting buildings nearby. It was an entire town built around the needs of the furnace operation. Work did not stay inside the industrial buildings. It shaped how people lived, where they shopped, what they ate, how they raised children, and eventually how they left when the jobs disappeared. During its years of operation, Fayette produced nearly 230,000 tons of pig iron ingots. Much of that iron was shipped to steel manufacturers around the lower Great Lakes region, helping supply rails and steel for a rapidly growing America. But the same formula that allowed Fayette to survive also limited how long it could last. The town depended on forests, limestone, harbor access, and charcoal-based iron production. As the iron and steel industry evolved, as forests became heavily depleted, and as newer industrial methods made older pig iron operations less competitive, Fayette slowly began losing its purpose. Then in 1891, the furnace went cold. For Fayette, that was not just a business decision. It was the moment the town lost its mechanical heart. Most workers and their families eventually left, but Fayette did not completely disappear. It remained behind in stone, wood, empty buildings, furnaces, and the silence between them. In 1959, the state of Michigan took over the site. Since then, the buildings have been stabilized, preserved, and interpreted for visitors. Today, people can walk through the town site, see the furnaces, a hotel, company store, workers' homes, harbor, and the tall limestone cliffs surrounding the area. Fayette Historic State Park does not tell its story through a single artifact. It tells it through space itself. A furnace here, a house there, a store nearby. And the empty spaces between them were once the rhythm of an entire town. Number 2. Beaver Island / St. James, Michigan. Today, if you stand along St. James Harbor and look across Beaver Island, everything feels quiet. The waters of Lake Michigan are blue. Small boats rest near the docks, forests surround the shoreline, and the island seems like nothing more than a peaceful place where people escape the mainland for a few days. But that calm atmosphere makes the island's past even harder to believe. In the mid-19th century, this island was once home to a man known as King James I. Beaver Island was not just geographically isolated. It was isolated enough for an entirely separate community to take root and operate according to its own rhythm. For James J. Strang and his followers, the island was not simply a refuge. It was the place where they intended to build a new center of power. The story began after the death of Joseph Smith in 1844. The Latter-day Saint movement fell into a succession crisis. James J. Strang declared himself the rightful successor, gathered his own followers, and refused to follow Brigham Young to Utah. Instead, he built his own branch of the movement and relocated his community to Beaver Island. In 1849, St. James was established. Then, in July 1850, James J. Strang was crowned King James I within his religious community. That did not mean Beaver Island became an officially recognized kingdom. The strange part lies elsewhere. Inside the territory of the United States, an isolated island community had become organized, loyal, and self-contained enough for one man to be called a king. And this was not simply symbolic theater. Strang and his followers built a functioning society in St. James. The old Mormon print shop was constructed in 1850 and used to publish the Northern Islander, the first newspaper in northern Michigan, along with religious materials. A newspaper on such a remote island mattered enormously. It showed that Strang wanted more than followers. He wanted a voice, a system, and a way to control the story being told. As the Strangite community grew, tensions also intensified. On the mainland, conflicts can spread outward. On a small island, everything becomes compressed together. Belief, authority, economics, and daily life existed too close to one another. Then, in 1856, the system collapsed. James J. Strang was attacked near St. James Harbor and later died from his injuries. For his followers, this was not merely the loss of a leader. It was the moment their entire separate world on the island lost its center. Today, what remains is not a throne or a castle. It is a small printing shop that now operates as a museum. And that says a great deal about the kind of power that once existed here. The power of belief, printed words, and stories repeated long enough for people to dedicate their lives to them. Number 1. Singapore, Michigan. There is a town in Michigan that was not destroyed by war, wiped out by fire, or simply abandoned after its factories closed. It was buried, not beneath volcanic ash like destruction of Pompeii, but beneath the sand dunes of Lake Michigan. Its name was Singapore. Before disappearing beneath the dunes near Saugatuck, Singapore was a real lumber town. It sat near the mouth of the Kalamazoo River, in a location ideal for sawmills, shipping, and timber transportation. Founded in 1836, the town grew because of forests, waterways, and the rapidly increasing demand for lumber throughout the Great Lakes region. Singapore was not built to fail. It once had sawmills, homes, stores, hotels, banks, and an active commercial life. The population was never enormous, but the town had every reason to believe in its future. It had timber. It had access to water transportation, and it existed inside a growing America that desperately needed wood to build expanding cities. After the Great Chicago Fire in 1871, demand for lumber increased even more dramatically. Singapore became one of the suppliers helping rebuild Chicago. Every shipment of timber leaving town represented money, jobs, and hope. But at the same time, the town was beginning to lose the very thing protecting it. The forests surrounding Singapore were not just resources to cut and sell. They also stabilized the sand, blocked wind, and slowed the movement of nearby dunes. Once large sections of forest were heavily logged, the land around the town became exposed to powerful winds blowing off Lake Michigan. Then the sand began moving in. It did not bury the town overnight. The dunes advance slowly, season by season, windstorm by windstorm, across increasingly open ground. What makes the story even stranger is that while the sand was moving closer, Singapore's economy was already weakening. By the mid-1870s, the lumber industry was changing. Larger industrial operations made smaller sawmills less competitive. Some factory equipment was moved elsewhere. Many buildings were dismantled or relocated to Saugatuck. What remained was eventually covered by sand. Singapore is often called the Pompeii of Michigan, but the comparison is not entirely accurate.
Pompeii vanished in a sudden catastrophe. Singapore declined more slowly. It was dismantled piece by piece, abandoned, and then the dunes completed the final stage of the process. Today, Singapore is not a place visitors walk through the way they do at Fayette.
There are few remaining structures to see. The town survives mostly through historic markers, local tours, old stories, and the imagination of people standing before the dunes near Saugatuck, trying to picture an entire town hidden somewhere underneath the sand. Michigan feels strange not simply because of unusual names or places that look different from the rest of America. What makes these towns memorable is that each one preserves a different kind of past. Some lost the future they once expected. Some watched industry permanently change their shoreline. Some slowed life down in ways the rest of America no longer does. And some almost disappeared beneath the sand itself. If you had to choose the town that fascinates you the most from this list, which one would it be? Marshall, Mackinac Island, Beaver Island, or Singapore? Leave a comment below. And if you want to explore more unusual towns across America, don't forget to follow the channel.